Mira arrived at the Hall of Coils an hour before dusk, boots crunching on salt that had blown in from the dry sea. The sky overhead was bruised purple, as if the sun were ashamed of how little light it could still give. Inside, people huddled between walls of scavenged copper wire and blackened solar panels, artifacts that no longer worked, but looked reassuring anyway. The real power, everyone knew, sat at the center of the room. A waist-high glass drum packed with nickel discs and a filament as thin as spider hair. They called it the battery, even though no one alive could name all its parts. Every evening it lay dull and dead. Every evening they tried to wake it by telling stories. It was the only trick left from the old engineers, and even the engineers had seemed half ashamed when they wrote it into the manuals. Illumination increases in proportion to novelty, cohesion, and emotional resonance of spoken narratives. Repetition causes catastrophic depletion. In simpler words, tell a good story and the lights come on. Steal a story, or even lean too heavily on one you'd told before, and the filament dimmed to nothing. The library of printed tales had been burned long ago, partly for warmth and partly to keep temptation away. Memory was all they had, memory and imagination. Tonight, the battery needed to be full by moonrise. A dust front was rolling in from the west, and without light the town's filters wouldn't open, and without the filters everyone would cough themselves bloody by morning. Mira set her knapsack beside the dais and joined the semicircle of benches. Old Jalen, the chief storysmith, sat hunched in a patched velvet chair. The rest of the cohort, 30-odd men and women of varying ages, looked smaller than usual in the dimness. Above them, a tangle of wires ran to ceiling bulbs the size of a child's fist. None glowed yet. Jalen's voice rasped through the hush. "Record keepers ready?" A boy with ink-stained fingers raised a slate. "Ready? Battery monitors?" 3 girls held up calibrated mirrors to reflect whatever glow might come. "Ready?" Mira's pulse quickened. She was scheduled third tonight, just after Borsa the baritone and a newcomer named Cassian. Jalen had postponed her debut for months, saying her tales were flashes of color in a fog, brilliant but thin. She'd spent the last week weaving everything she knew about her mother's journey across the salt flats, mixing truth with the kind of flourishes people secretly craved. If it worked, the battery would blaze like a captured dawn. If she failed, tomorrow's breath would taste like rust. Borsa rose first, shoulders broad under a coat sewn from curtains. He cleared his throat. His bass seemed to vibrate the benches. The tale he offered was about a migrating city on wheels, its streets turning like clock gears, so that every citizen lived beneath every other citizen once a year. It was whimsical, half plausible, and entirely new. As he spoke, filaments inside the battery began to shimmer. By his final paragraph, when the city finally locked in place long enough for 2 lovers to meet, the shimmer became a steady glow. The mirrors showed a pale lily-white halo. Applause was forbidden. Clapping distracted the flow of current, so the crowd just breathed a collective sigh. Borsa bowed and sat. The light held. They had maybe 8% of a full charge. Not bad. Cassian took the floor next. Mira didn't know much about him, except that he'd arrived 2 weeks earlier, with a bundle of tool blades and a magnificent head of curled hair. During orientation, he'd listened more than he'd spoken. Tonight, he adjusted the collar of his scavenged pilot's jacket and smiled the elaborate smile of someone about to impress a room. His story began with children carving whistles from glacier ice that wouldn't melt. Mira leaned forward despite herself. The opening image was lovely, but then Cassian shifted to a tale of a girl who traded the whistles for wishes And that was where Mira's gut tightened. She had heard most of those beats before, from Jalen himself, 6 years ago, on the night Mira's own mother was admitted into the hall. Cassian was reproducing it nearly word for word, down to the phrase, sharp as icicle music. The crowd sensed it too. Heads turned toward Jalen, whose knuckles whitened on his cane. 5 minutes in, the battery faltered. The glow thinned to cigarette ember, then to smoke. Cassian seemed oblivious and barreled through the climax, where the girl realized too late that every wish whittled a year off her life. By the time he whispered the closing line, and the last breath left her like a snowflake on a furnace, the filament was dark. Cassian swallowed. I thought, perhaps an old story retold. Jalen lifted a hand. Silence. You thought you'd feed us echoes. His voice, hoarse though it was, carried in the hush. You've cost us the energy we earned, and then some. Cassian's cheeks flamed. He stepped back, gaze flickering toward the exit, but no one moved to let him pass. Now it was Mira's turn, and the battery lay blacker than when the evening began. She walked to the center, heartbeat drumming. The monitors reset their mirrors to 0. Dusk outside slipped toward night. Already a cool breeze moaned through cracked masonry. Some faces in the audience begged with their eyes. Others looked away, resigned. Mira closed her own eyes for a beat, calling up her mother's voice. You hold a story like you hold a spark, her mother had told her once. Cup it too loosely, and the wind steals it. Cup it too tight, and you snuff it yourself. Mira breathed in, breathed out, and began. My mother was 11 when the world went dark, she said, letting the sentence rest long enough that people leaned in. Not the kind of night we're in now, but a darkness so complete you could taste it on your teeth. The old lights failed all at once. The dams, the fusion lines, the satellites. People thought it was sabotage, then a solar storm, then divine bookkeeping. But it was just neglect. We'd grown so used to brightness that we forgot what fed it. She described how her mother had walked out of a collapsing township with a flock of strangers who all claimed to be relatives, because it was safer to be someone's niece than no one's anything. She told how the salt sea, once an ocean, boiled away in silent white waves, leaving fish bones knit together like lace across the basin floor. As she spoke, the filament relit, faint but real. She didn't look. She didn't dare. She told how her mother had carried a rusted coffee can full of seeds, the last gifts of a gardener who died an hour after placing them in her hands. Most germinated into nothing. One sprouted a red flower no one could name. From that bloom came a fruit the size of a thumbnail, sweet enough to make 3 men weep. The mother saved its seeds too, planting them whenever they found rain pits deep enough to dampen soil. Years later, crossing the flats again, she stumbled upon a line of red blossoms tracing her earlier footsteps like lanterns. The battery brightened, mirrors reflecting yellow now, warm as late afternoon. Mira shifted from third person to first. I was born in the shadow of those flowers, she said. My first memory is of petals tucked behind my ear, so the perfume would push back nightmares. She recounted the day raiders came, how they trampled the garden looking for metal parts, how her mother distracted them with a tale about a treasure buried under the next dune. She lied so well they marked the spot and spent a week digging. And when they left, cursing, the holes they'd made gathered rainwater. The garden doubled in a season. The battery leapt to orange, illuminating every watchful face. Even Cassian stared, pupils shrinking against the unexpected glare. Mira didn't slow. She spoke of the long march east when the blooms finally withered, how her mother taught her the difference between losing a place and losing the memory of a place. She told of meeting Jalen outside a gutted museum, trading 2 red seeds for safe passage here. And the night we arrived, she said, voice softening. My mother told me the first story I'm certain I ever understood. She said each bloom on that journey was an attempt at light. She said light comes in many forms: fire, bulb, dawn, or a tale so bright it lets other people see. Mira felt tears at the back of her throat, so she fed them into cadence. My mother is ash beneath a stone cairn on the ridge beyond town. The seeds she saved are gone, but the taste of that fruit lives in every word I've spoken tonight. If you can feel its sweetness on your tongue even now, then the light has not left us. It never will, so long as we remember how to grow it. She stopped. Silence pooled, thick but gentle. The monitors gasped. The center filament blazed white, then pale gold, then a fierce cobalt usually seen only in welding arcs. Bulbs across the ceiling erupted in tears until the hall of coils glittered like winter constellations. People shaded their eyes. A thrum passed through the wire walls. Tiny motes of dust danced and vanished. 41%, one monitor whispered. Another cross-checked. 43 and climbing. Jalen bowed his head, a gesture part blessing, part apology for having doubted her. Remember this moment, he said to the assembly, for it proves that originality is more than vanity. It is survival. Cassian shuffled forward. Under the ruthless new light, his fine jacket showed tears and mended stitches ignorant eyes had missed. I didn't know, he said, words cracking. I thought if I could quote something proven. You thought safety lay in certainty, Jalen answered, tone clipped but calm. You forgot the first certainty. Repeat power, lose power. Cassian knelt beside Mira. Teach me, he asked so quietly, she barely heard. She studied him, remembering how tempting it had been a year ago to repeat Borsa's clever imagery about cloud caravans and simply swap camels for whales. But she hadn't, and now the lights were up. Yes, she said, but tonight you're on sweeping duty. Lights this strong draw moths, and moths clog filters. He nodded, looking relieved to be given any role at all. The storm outside came earlier than predicted. Rain hammered the roof like thrown gravel. Dust and water made paste against shuttered vents. Inside, though, bulbs stayed bright. Jalen called for additional storytellers, not to increase charge much further, but to hold it steady, keep it humming. 2 novices told tiny vignettes, careful watchwords of love and weather and apology. Their contributions neither brightened nor dimmed the reserve, which was acceptable. In times of bounty, neutrality was enough. Hours passed. When the monitors announced 90%, Jalen ordered the dais lid locked. Overcharging risked a melt-through, and no one wanted molten nickel sluicing across the floor. People dispersed to their dorms, trailing chatter like sparks behind a wagon wheel. Mira lingered to coil microphone cables. Cassian swept the final moths into a jar for release after the storm. Jalen sat resting, eyes closed, perhaps listening to stories only he could hear. In the morning, gusts had carved dunes against the doorways. Opening the hall required 3 men with shovels, but when they got it unstuck, the corridors beyond were lit by auxiliary bulbs wired to the central battery. Children chased each other in brightness no one under 20 had ever experienced. They kicked up sand, laughing at how it glimmered. By midday, the filters had sifted the air clean of sour dust. The whole town felt rewoven, as if someone had patched a quilt where the stuffing poked through. Jalen met Mira outside the commissary, leaning on his cane but standing straighter than she'd seen in weeks. "Walk with me," he said. They wandered the ridge path, pausing at her mother's cairn. The marker was a single gear from a broken windmill, set upright in stone, teeth rising like dawn rays. New clouds clumped overhead, smooth pearl-gray shingles, shepherded by high winds. For once, Mira thought, they looked decorative rather than menacing. "She would have been proud," Jalen said. "I like to think she heard it." Perhaps she did. In any case, the community heard. "Your apprenticeship is complete, though you are welcomed in the hall any time." He tapped the cairn with his cane tip. "And you gave us something else. Seeds." Mira frowned. "I told you. The seeds were lost years ago." "Physical ones, yes, but ideas germinate too." He turned toward the valley where the salt flats shimmered. "Last night you reminded us that stories grow back, even ones people think they burned for good." Mira felt heat behind her eyes again. "Then maybe the battery isn't the only thing we can charge." "That's the spirit." Jalen chuckled. "Soon we'll have an orchard of tales so rich that one plagiarist won't scare us." She thought of Cassian, hunched over his broom. "He's not wicked, just desperate. We all are." "Desperation breeds shortcuts," Jalen said. "Shortcuts breed collapse. Best we watch for both." They headed down, and by the time they reached town, Cassian was on a makeshift dais reading from a crumpled notebook. He stopped when he saw them, expecting censure. Mira lifted a hand. "Keep going." He swallowed and began again. The tale was clearly a draft. Sentences doubled back, verbs did odd acrobatics. But it was his, original in its awkwardness. Something about a dog that carried messages between separated hill tribes. The premise wobbled, but halfway through a line emerged so honest that Jalen's eyebrows lifted. "Love is the only letter that delivers itself." The nearby bulb flickered warmer. A handful of children clapped before remembering the rule. They stuffed hands in pockets, eyes fizzy with wonder at the effect. Cassian ended with a sheepish grin. "Still rough." "Rough works," Jalen said. "You polished nothing but your own stone, and the battery rewarded it." Mira took the broom from his grip. "Shift's over. Come taste real daylight." She gestured up. The midday sun fought through thinning clouds, pale gold on cracked pavement. Together they stepped into it, savoring light that owed nothing to cables or coils. That afternoon, a planning council convened in the hall. Under the fresh radiance, they resolved to establish a second battery in the eastern annex. Smaller, but crucial. They drafted rules. No single storyteller could dominate 3 nights running. No written prompts allowed in the hall, to guard against the lazy theft of phrasing. If disputes arose, the community would vote by lantern, literally placing lamps beside the teller they believed most original. Someone asked what punishment plagiarists should face. Voices suggested temporary exile, ration cuts, or week-long silence. Mira, after some thought, proposed a different sentence. Make them clean the mirrors, dust the coils, and sit front row at every session until they crave authenticity the way a parched man craves water. The council agreed by majority. Cassian nodded emphatically. In the weeks that followed, tales bloomed like those legendary red flowers. An elder described skyships that navigated auroras. A 9-year-old recounted a dream where wolves learned to speak and asked for vegetables. Even the shy mechanic who rarely left his motor delivered a poem about gears singing lullabies. The battery never again fell below 60%. Months later, when travelers arrived bearing rumors of revived solar arrays to the south, Mira volunteered to guide an expedition. Before leaving, she returned to her mother's cairn and tucked a scrap of paper beneath the gearstone. A short story about a garden that refused to die. She hoped rain wouldn't erase the ink too quickly, but even if it did, someone might find it, read it aloud, and see the sky brighten for an instant. Because that was the secret the old engineers hinted at, and the survivors finally understood. Energy could neither be created nor destroyed, but it could be transformed into movement, into heat, or into words bright enough to see by. As long as the stories kept changing, the current would keep flowing, and the people, huddled at the edge of a world that once forgot itself, would not merely endure the night. They would name it, illuminate it, and when dawn returned, greet it as an equal.